Greetings. This is Griff Ruby with part 54 of my series, Ecclesiology for Sedevacantists, based on Dogmatic Theology, Volume 2, Christ's Church, by Msgr G. Van Noort. In the last session, we were talking a little bit about the unity of the church, and I was realizing one other aspect of the unity that's very strong, dramatic, and miraculous is how traditional Catholics all around the world not only hold the same beliefs, but even the same calendar, the same feasts, as well as all the same beliefs, practices, and so forth. And they do this, even despite the widespread vacancy of just practically all the offices that usually would have been around to impose this kind of order. This is unusual. This is unparalleled. We're still here. We're still united. But let us continue on to the second mark. Holiness, page 162. Okay. Holiness. Not everything that has been said about holiness, insofar as it is a property of the church, can be applied in exactly the same way when we consider holiness as a mark. For example, if our discussion be limited to the means of holiness and exclusively to the bare possession of such means, it must be admitted that some of the means to holiness can be found in a false church. That is to say, for example, holy communities of monks or nuns. I mean, anybody could found a group of monks or nuns. Some of the more high church Episcopalians, the East Orthodox have these sorts of things. So they could have these kinds of things. Nothing prevents some sect, well, and of course the Novus Ordo, of course, has all these things that it took over from the church too. Nothing prevents some sect which is split off from the true church from holding on to the doctrine, sacraments, laws, and most of the devotional activities of that church. Such a sect, not rightfully of course, but physically nonetheless, might continue to possess some of the means to holiness. Contrariwise, any church holding even one doctrine or one institution which is clearly contradictory to holiness stands convicted as a counterfeit. A church, for example, which would espouse euthanasia, or abortion, or homosexual marriage, or priestesses, or heretical ecumenism with false religions, or what have you, would betray an erroneous moral sense. Holiness of members, which does not reach heroic proportion, can also be found in some fashion in a false church. That happens, however, purely accidentally. God, who wills all men to be saved, does not deprive men who are innocently enmeshed in error of his normal graces. This is to say, you can find good people in a lot of different false churches and things, and that's a given. There's definitely a lot of genuinely good people, and that's what this is really admitting. This isn't to say that they're in a good position before God. This is not the grace unto salvation. This is, in fact, if you had to deviate this out, well, let's read this further. Furthermore, most of the sacraments can be validly administered even outside the true church. If the recipients be in good faith, these sacraments can be fruitfully received and produce some harvest of holiness even outside the house of God. They produce their effects. I mean, a baptism conducted by a heretic, providing it's formal, correct form and matter, etc., is a valid. It does place the mark of the baptism sacrament on the person's soul. Unfortunately, the grace that would go with that ordinarily is, basically either not there, or in the case of someone who's, like an infant or otherwise incapable of reason, yeah, they have basically, out of the random circumstance of God, received something that basically isn't the place of those who gave it to them. So they're like a recipient of stolen food who is too little to understand what it means for the food to have been stolen. They just ate and they were fed. So we don't call, if a food is stolen and given to a baby, we don't call the baby a thief. But the thief is still a thief. Okay. If the recipients, okay. Doubtless, even this ordinary type of holiness occurs far more frequently within the true church than outside of it. But since that greater frequency is not discernible except by difficult investigation, and is not something obvious, its incidence lies open to much quibbling. If then holiness is to serve as a distinguishing mark of the true church we must limit our investigation, if not exclusively, then at least principally, to heroic holiness of the members and to the holiness of Taoisms. So, I just want to check something here. We have a footnote, and maybe see number 6 here about talking about the percentage or something, about the only procedure one could follow would be to compile some sort of statistics of morality, and that would be highly unreliable. For A, it is impossible to select all points of comparison in such a way that all circumstances would be equal on both sides with the sole exception of religion. Then B, even granted absolutely fair and absolutely accurate statistics, only a very limited number of virtuous acts would be capable of being statistically analyzed. Practically all that could be examined would be works of piety or charity performed in public, but the motivating reasons behind the deeds, on which morality depends to a large extent, completely escape the reach of statistics. Finally, C, as for sins, again, statistics may reach only the smallest portion of them, and one cannot justly divide the shadows from the light by such a method. A woman who becomes pregnant by a sinful act would throw statistics out of gear completely, if in addition to the sin already committed, she would not be afraid to add another sin by having an abortion. Her sins would be in no danger of detection by the birth of illegitimate children. Again, the sin of a man who gets angry and uses insulting language to another would be easily detectable and would not receive a black mark against his name. But another chap who is busily engaged in lecturing and writing about overturning the foundations of religion, morality, and public peace, so long as he does so with an air of objective gravity, would not find a place in the statistic table of sinners. A philosopher who advocates perversity with an air of sweet reasonableness is often classified as a sort of humanitarian saint rather than as a sinner. Finally, all that statistics can measure in morality is the physically perceptible side of moral actions, and attempt to adjudicate morality on that basis is valueless. So you can see there really isn't much of a way you can evaluate holiness of the church, even by some kind of statistical method. All right. Very interesting footnote. I thought that was worth bringing in. And then cherubims, another footnote right on the page, are extraordinary gifts of God, such as miracle working, prophecy, speaking or interpreting strange tongues, etc. See 1 Corinthians 12:4, 7-11, Romans 12:6. They are usually bestowed not for the sake of the individual recipient so much as for the edification of the church as a whole. For a discussion of this matter, see Garrigou-Lagrange, The Three Ages of the Interior Life, Volume 2, starting at page 575, and so on. Okay. So, continuing main text. Extraordinary or heroic holiness is, by the very fact that it is far beyond the normal measure, is readily perceived. Furthermore, heroic holiness can be acknowledged to be a mark of the true church even before one actually locates the true church. Finally, such extraordinary holiness will never be found outside the true church. Such holiness requires an extraordinary abundance of graces that is not granted to those in error. Even though Christ does not deprive anyone of necessary graces, he does nourish and cherish his own flesh, his church, with an altogether special love. Otherwise, God himself would lead mankind into error, were he to raise up, outside the road to salvation, heroes of sanctity. The same thing holds true with even greater force of the cherubims, which attest either to the holiness of the church itself or the holiness of its finest members. And that's true here, once again. Traditional Catholics, where are you going to find real miracles? I just read somewhere somebody's now attempting to attribute miracles to John Paul II and Mother Teresa. Good grief. Uh, on what basis? You know, they did away with the devil's advocate. They did away with a whole lot of processes. Basically, all they've done is just short circuit the whole thing, and they can call anybody a saint that's popular. I mean, maybe they'll be having us call the Beatles saints. You know, why not? They're popular. So, you know, I mean, that's the only kind of popularity that, you know, that's the only basis there is. There's not going to be any real miracle. No, it's not real miracles. Real miracles of the sort that the church used to be able to confirm, you know, where they happen at all, they happen among traditional Catholics and nobody and nowhere else. And that is one thing that we do have. And another thing is people that are extraordinarily holy. There are certain saints. And you know, I believe I've met some of them myself. And it's very dramatic and powerful to know them. So that's how that works. Christ himself, at least in some fashion, referred to the mark of holiness when he said, "Just so let your light shine before your fellow man, that they may see your good example and praise your Father who is in heaven." Okay, thank you very much.